You better keep this close hold.
Hey, I am Chuck the bureaucrat, and the other day I was talking about the fact that different bosses prioritize the benefits of loyalty and competence differently. And one of you asked about action officers keeping back channel lines of communication open and strategically leaking information to further the Army's mission. Oh, this might be the most touchy subject for action officers. In fact, successfully navigating this, not sharing too much, but sharing enough, navigating this issue often is what makes or breaks an action officer's career. Okay, before we get into all of this, I want to remind you about something that I call the 3-layer model. It's just a basic organizational structure that shows up again and again and again inside the bureaucracy. You got an executive who makes decisions. Typically, this is a general officer or an SES. You can tell that you're dealing with an executive because they usually handle a wide range of topics. They typically have a front office, and they sign their name on the dotted line of decisions. Under executives, you have directors, and in the Pentagon, that's usually colonels and GS-15s. And I'll come back to their role in a second. The 3rd layer is the action officers, typically majors and lieutenant colonels, GS-12 through 14, a bunch of contractors. Action officers work specific topics. They get down in the weeds. They do a lot of work of meeting with people and refining PowerPoint slides. To wrap up this summary of the 3-layer model, let's go back to the directors, because their role is to act as an intermediary between the executives and the action officers. On the surface, directors typically have a portfolio that they work for the executive, and that portfolio has a theme for all the issues that are contained within it. One director might be handling tactical wheeled vehicles, while another director is handling watercraft. But what directors are really doing is handling the flow of information between executives and action officers. Sometimes they're filtering out unnecessary things as information goes from the action officer up to the executive. And other times they're filling in the gaps of guidance that comes from the executive to the action officer. And the reason that I remind you of this interorganizational information flow is because how an action officer shares information laterally is influenced by it. Your executive, particularly a general officer, they want to be successful. They want to do a good job, and they want to get promoted. And a key way that they do it is by maintaining a healthy relationship with the other generals. In the spirit of accomplishing this, people will say things about executives like, they don't like to be surprised, or they don't like to be involved in the sausage making. So there has to be a flow of information at the action officer level. It might not be pretty, but it has to exist. And I'll start with a pet peeve of mine up front. I do not like people who say, keep this close hold. I might not be an expert on security classification markings, but I'm pretty sure close hold isn't one of them. Close hold can mean a dozen different things to 10 different people. So whenever somebody says, keep this close hold, I always want to clarify, who is it I'm not supposed to be sharing this with? Is it just the 3 of us in this meeting? Is it internal to the executive staff? Can I talk to the secretariat about it? I mean, let's be on the same page. And look, you might be the junior guy in some meeting and have to ask what close hold means in this circumstance, but trust me, it's better to look a fool now than to misinterpret what you've been told. Oh, and remember that when people say close hold, you never know what they mean. The same guy will use the phrase close hold and mean don't give this to OSD, and then turn around and on the next project what he means is don't share this with other staff sections. So you always got to ask. And the reason I have such a burr in my side about this is because once upon a time I was a major and I was working on some close hold project. My two-star general had given a copy of our slide deck to another two-star general, and in the fullness of time, one of his action officers reached out to me with questions about that slide deck. I started answering the questions, and my colonel went ballistic because this is close hold. And look, my view is that if general officers are talking to each other about it, they expect that their action officers are talking to each other about it. In fact, that's exactly what the two-star explained to the colonel. And even if the executive or the director don't bring it up, I usually broach this issue. I just ask, is it okay if I talk to anybody about this? Usually, you get the green light. Yeah, go ahead. But in those cases where you don't, thank goodness that you clarified. Now, there are going to be some situations where you have to be circumspect. In those situations where you're sending signals across organizational boundaries, it's best if you can just point towards publicly available information. Do you know who the assistant secretary is meeting with tomorrow at 2 and what they're talking about? Your buddy can find out that his boss has been intentionally cut out of a meeting, and honestly, all you did is ask a simple question. Something similar goes for non-disclosure agreements. Personally, I am not averse to saying I signed a non-disclosure agreement on that, but you can often signal a lot about what's going on simply by the things you don't say. All nuance aside, it's pretty easy to let people get a glimpse of a document. On occasion, I have photocopied a single sheet of paper out of a slide deck, crumpled it up, and then given it to somebody. Heck, I've even given people bootleg hard copies of documents. Now, before you guys get on me about all the cloak and dagger BS, the real reason to do this is to signal to the other people that you don't have your boss's full support on sharing, and it would be really nice if they didn't get you into trouble. Another reason to share information this way is it tends to catch the attention of the other guy. It makes a point of underlining that your boss better be ready to address this issue. Now, there is one other thing you can do. You can email something to someone and say, please do not forward. Personally, I don't like this technique because it's so easy for things to get out of control. The guy you sent it to does forward it to somebody and then it boomerangs back to you. So I only do this when the subject matter isn't really sensitive. Personally, I tend to view this more of a test of whether or not I can trust someone. And I certainly assume that I'm being tested when somebody sends me one of these do not forward emails. In fact, in a lot of cases, I go so far as copying the text out of my email and then deleting that file in Outlook so that there's no mishaps. At any rate, getting out there and communicating with people is exactly what we need you to be doing. Sure, you've got to be professional about it, but you can't avoid communicating with other offices and accomplish anything that's meaningful. In fact, if you want to see how important this is, watch this video on the different types of bureaucrats.